Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we unearth the hidden stories behind the everyday world.
Mhm.
Today we're embarking on, well, a linguistic adventure, plunging into something incredibly fundamental,
Yeah.
the very words we use. I mean, every single word in our vocabulary holds a secret history, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. A journey through time, through culture, often stamped with these surprising twists and turns that just make you stop and think.
Yeah, they really make you double take sometimes.
It's like thinking of our language as this vast, intricate, living tapestry,
That's a great image.
and each word is a unique thread woven through centuries of human experience. It's constantly picking up new colors, new textures, sometimes completely changing its pattern altogether.
And when you pull on one thread, suddenly you see all these connections you never expected.
Exactly. You realize it's connected to dozens, maybe hundreds of others in ways you'd never have guessed.
That's the beauty of it. So for this deep dive, we've taken a really fascinating segment from the Oxford Dictionary of Word Histories.
A fantastic resource.
It really is. And we're focusing specifically on words that begin with the letter R. Our mission, really, is to unearth the most important nuggets of knowledge, the key insights from these sources.
Kind of providing a shortcut, maybe.
Exactly. A shortcut to being well-informed about this incredible, evolving landscape of our language. Because it is constantly evolving.
Oh, absolutely. And, prepare for some genuine surprises. As we navigate the R's, we're going to find words that have completely reversed their meanings over time.
That always blows my mind.
Me too. And words with astonishingly common origins linking things you'd think are totally unrelated. And we'll see the sheer transformative power of just one tiny prefix shaping dozens, maybe hundreds of words.
Okay, let's start right there then. Let's unpack one of the most incredible linguistic tools that just keeps popping up again and again in the sources, the prefix ear.
Ah, yes.
It feels like the master key to a whole wing of the dictionary, revealing so many hidden connections. I always just thought of it as meaning, again, pretty simple, but I've heard there's actually so much more to it.
There really is. It's an excellent place to start because the row is surprisingly versatile. I mean, at its very core, yes, it comes from the Latin re or sometimes red,
Okay.
and its fundamental meaning is indeed again or back. But what's truly fascinating is how it's been applied across, well, thousands of English words.
Right.
And that's given rise to this incredibly rich array of nuanced meanings, far beyond just simple repetition. It's a testament, really, to how efficiently language reuses these small building blocks for vast complexity.
Okay, so let's start with that primary sense, the one we all kind of get intuitively.
Hmm.
Ru meaning once more or afresh.
Yeah,
This feels like, I don't know, hitting the restart button on a computer program, doing something all over again.
exactly. That's the perfect analogy. It denotes repetition or renewal.
So if you reaccustom yourself to something,
Mm-hmm.
you're not just getting used to it once, but
Mhm.
becoming accustomed once more, maybe after a break.
Okay.
To reactivate means to make something active again. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
And reiterate, a word we use constantly, Greg.
It comes directly from the Latin reiterare, which literally meant to go over again. It emphasizes that the action is being done repeatedly. It's a clear signal, second time, third time, multiple times.
Got it. But then there's this sense of suggesting a return to a previous state. Now, this isn't just doing something again. Generally, it feels more specific, like bringing it back to how it was before.
Precisely. This implies a movement back to an original or former condition. So when you restore an old photo, say, you're hoping to bring it back to its original vibrancy or, at least a former better state.
Right. You're not just taking the photo again. You're fixing the old one.
Exactly. And similarly, to revert is to return to an earlier condition, maybe an earlier practice or even a belief. Think about how often we talk about restoring things in our lives.
Yeah, restoring old furniture, restoring friendships, maybe.
Right. Tangible things, intangible things. It's fundamentally about recuperating what was once there, getting back to a baseline.
Now, here's where it gets maybe a bit trickier.
Yeah.
Can also indicate something done in return or mutually. So it's not just repetition anymore. There's an interaction happening back and forth.
This is where it starts highlighting that reciprocal nature. For instance, to react. It means to do something in return, right? To respond to an action.
Okay.
The source points out its Latin origin reaware, which did originally mean to do again, but it also developed this concept of opposing forces. A bit like how we understand reaction in chemistry.
Ah, I see the link.
Yeah.
An action and a counteraction.
Precisely. Or take the word resemble. It comes from Latin similar, meaning like.
Okay.
So to resemble someone is, in a way, to be like them in return, to mirror their qualities, to echo their appearance. It's subtle, but it's a significant shift from just doing something again to doing something responsively, like a mirrored action.
Okay, that makes sense. But then, this is really surprising to me. Rear can actually convey opposition. How does a prefix meaning again or backflip to mean against?
Yeah.
What's the connection there?
It is a fascinating semantic leap, isn't it? It seems to rely on that back meaning, but in a more confrontational sense, think pushing back.
Okay.
Consider resistance. It comes straight from the Latin resistor, meaning literally to stand back or to stop. So it implies standing against something, pushing back.
Right. Resist.
Or rebel, from the Latin rebellis. Now, this originally referred to an enemy who makes a fresh declaration of war after being defeated. So they're acting again, but specifically in opposition to the victor.
Ah, so it's not just war again, it's war back at you.
Exactly. Or rebuff, meaning to repel someone. That comes from Italian re, meaning opposition, and buffo, meaning a gust or puff. Like being pushed back by a sudden force. You can see how back can imply pushing back or countering.
And thinking historically, like the resistance in World War II.
Perfect, powerful example of this meaning in action. A collective standing against an occupying force that carries real weight there.
So it's almost like a pushback action. And kind of related to that, there's also a more spatial sense, right? Indicating something left behind or coming after.
Indeed. This shows how "were" can signify something that remains or follows. Take the word relic. The source tells us it was originally plural from the Latin reliquiae, meaning simply remains. This could be objects left behind from a holy person, held in veneration, or just, the general remains of a deceased person.
Things left behind.
Exactly, and remain too, from Latin remanere, to stay behind. These words literally carry that idea of something left in the wake of something else, enduring after an event or a departure.
And building on that idea of being left behind or maybe turning back, you get words implying a withdrawn state.
Yes, focusing on seclusion or retreat. Recluse is a great example. It comes from Latin recludere, meaning to enclose or to shut away. So it refers to a person who is voluntarily shut away from the world. Or, as an adjective, it describes something secluded. It really evokes that idea of someone withdrawing into themselves or being physically enclosed, turning back from society.
Okay, now this is the absolute mind bender for me. Real can actually add intensity to a word. It amps it up. That seems to totally contradict its ability to mean back or even negate, which we'll get to. How does one prefix manage all that?
It's truly remarkable, isn't it? And it's what makes language so rich and, sometimes delightfully perplexing. Instead of just repeating or reverting, it can sometimes simply amplify the meaning of the base word, make it more complete, more forceful, like a linguistic exclamation point.
Okay, give me an example.
All right, refine. It comes from fine, meaning clarify.
Right.
Adding "urier" amplifies it to mean intense purification, a meticulous process of making something utterly clear or pure. It's not just clarifying again, it's clarifying completely, intensely, to the utmost degree.
So it's like do really again or do completely.
Yeah.
That's wild. What are some other really striking examples where it is clearly an intensifier? The source lists quite a few.
It does, and it really hammers home this intensive function. Let's pick a few that illustrate it beautifully. How about remorse?
Ooh, good one. Heavy word.
Very. The Latin root mortar means to bite.
Okay.
With the intensive ori, remorse becomes to bite back intensely. It's such a visceral image, isn't it? That feeling of regret and guilt literally gnawing at you from within, biting you again and again intensely.
Wow, yeah, that gives it a whole new weight. What about something like resplendent?
Another great one. The Latin splendor means to shine. Add ori and it becomes to shine intensely, dazzlingly bright. It's not just shining, it's radiating brilliance, almost overwhelmingly so. Shining again and again brightly.
That makes sense. It feels more active than just shining. What about reconcile?
Reconcile fits perfectly. It comes from Latin conciliare, to bring together. Here adds that intensive force, implying bringing together so completely that differences are resolved. A thorough mending. It's about achieving a full, lasting harmony, bringing people together again, properly this time.
And require, how does that fit?
From Latin require, to search for or to deem necessary. There intensifies the act of seeking or needing. It makes it a strong demand, a fundamental necessity, not just a casual ask. Seeking again and again until you find it, or needing it intensely.
So many examples.
Yeah.
Recommend, regale, regard, rejoice, remonstrate,
remunerate, renounce, repent, replenish, represent.
rescind, rescue, resent, resolve.
Reverse, reveal, revenge, reverberate, reverence, revolt. It just goes on.
Yeah.
All carrying that extra force, that intensity derived from...
Okay, but then the absolute curveball can also negate a word's force. How? How can one prefix be so contradictory? It intensifies and negates. That's a linguistic paradox.
It really is the linguistic equivalent of a paradox, and it's what makes language so fascinating. The prime example given is recant. It comes from the Latin recantare, which meant to revoke, or literally to sing back. So to recant a statement means to withdraw it, renounce it, effectively undoing or negating its force, taking it back.
Wow. So one tiny prefix holds all these opposing powers: repeat, return, oppose, intensify, negate.
Depending on the word and its history.
Exactly. It's incredible linguistic efficiency, really.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. Words aren't static, right? They twist, they turn. Sometimes they completely flip their original meanings or even split into entirely new words. Let's look at some linguistic acrobats from our sources, words that took really unexpected turns.
Absolutely. This phenomenon, semantic shift, is incredibly common and just shows how dynamic language is. It's often driven by changes in usage, metaphor, association over time,
Right.
resulting in words that look familiar but have traveled miles from their original meaning. It's how language adapts to new realities, new ideas.
Let's start with rabbit. I mean, okay, a small hopping animal, we all know that. How on earth does that leap to meaning to talk incessantly? That seems like quite a jump. It is indeed a significant leap. The original meaning of rabbit in late Middle English was specifically a young rabbit. Apparently, it replaced the older English word coney.
Okay.
The word rabbit itself seems to come from Old French, possibly a dialect word for young rabbit. Then, somewhere in the mid-20th century, this verb sense, to talk incessantly, just emerges.
Any idea why?
The source doesn't give a definitive reason, but you can sort of imagine, can't you? The quick, darting, maybe restless movements of a rabbit, perhaps metaphorically linked to rapid-fire, nonstop talking, rabbiting on.
Yeah, I can kind of see that. It highlights how informal usage can just create entirely new meanings, almost out of nowhere.
Totally disconnected sometimes from the literal origin.
So words can really hop around. But what about words that don't just change, but actually split into completely separate identities, even though they sound identical? Race is a perfect example, not one, but two distinct words. This always trips people up.
It certainly does. And it's a fantastic illustration of homonyms, same sound, different meaning with entirely separate etymologies. So, race, the one involving speed and movement.
Right, like a horse race or a car race.
Exactly. That one's from Late Old English. Its equivalent in Old Norse, ras, meant a water current. It started as a Northern English word for rapid forward movement before getting specific as a contest of speed in the early 16th century.
Like a race of water flowing quickly.
Precisely. And it also took on the meaning of a channel or path, like in a mill race, which might connect to an old French word race for watercourse. So think fast-flowing current leading to a speed contest.
Okay, that makes sense. But then race, as in the human race or discussions about ethnicity, totally different feel.
Completely different origin. Race dates from the early 16th century. It came via French from the Italian raza, which meant a group or set of people, animals, plants with common features.
Ah, Italians.
Yes. This then evolved into phrases like the human race, later in the 16th century. Figuratively, it could also mean characteristic peculiarity, like the race and flavor of the conversation, its distinctive quality.
Interesting.
It even extended to a notion of liveliness or piquancy, which gives us adjectives like racy for stories.
So racy stories come from Italian rasa.
Apparently so. The fascinating thing is, despite sounding identical and maybe sometimes being used in contexts that might hint at groups or speed, these two words have zero common roots. It's a real aha moment when you see that.
Definitely. And we find this splitting again with rack. One is a torture device, obviously horrific, and the other, wine. The contrast is just so stark.
You're spotting the pattern. Rack, the framework for storing or shelf, is Middle English, from Middle Dutch or Low German words for a horizontal bar. Probably related to reckon, meaning to stretch.
Okay, stretching. I see where this is going.
Unfortunately, yes. That sense became tragically linked to the torture instrument in the 15th century, where a person was stretched, leading to the meaning to cause extreme pain or stress. Racked with guilt, for example.
Awful. But then the wine rack.
Totally different. Racca is a late 15th century wine term. It means to draw off wine from the sediment in the barrel. comes from Provençal arakar, referring to the stems and husks of grapes, or dregs, literally removing the dregs.
So storage, torture, and winemaking. 3 completely separate journeys for one sound. Amazing.
Isn't it?
And another pair. Racket, we have the sports bat, and then just a loud noise. Again, seems unrelated. I mean, when we hear the word racket today, who thinks about the palm of the hand?
Probably nobody. Racket, the sports bat, pops up in the early 16th century. It came from French raquette, but the source traces its ultimate origins back to Arabic raha, or rahat, meaning palm of the hand.
More Arabic.
Apparently, maybe the idea was a bat that fit the palm or acted as an extension of it. It also referred to an early ball game.
Okay, and the noise racket.
Racketeau, meaning din or loud noise, dates from the mid-16th century. It's likely imitative, onomatopoeic, basically, reflecting the sound of clattering or just discordant noise. So, yeah, worlds apart again.
No, ravel. This one just baffles me. It can mean its own opposite. It's like a linguistic knot in itself.
This is one of language's most fascinating quirks, isn't it? A contronym. The original sense of ravel in late Middle English was to entangle, to confuse. Probably came from the Dutch ravelen, meaning to fray out, tangle.
Okay, so to tangle.
Right. Yet in common modern use, when we say unravel, or even sometimes just ravel out.
It means untangle.
Exactly. Untangling or unweaving. The source points out that the older sense of tangling still exists in Scots and certain dialects. So the word literally holds 2 opposing meanings, a linguistic paradox where the action can create both order and disorder.
That's wild. Okay, what about reduce? I think of making smaller. But you said earlier it came from bringing back. How did that transform?
It's a subtle but significant shift. Reduce comes from Latin reducer, which fundamentally meant to bring back or to lead back.
Right, like restoring.
Exactly. Early English senses reflected this. Like in medicine, a dislocated bone is reduced, brought back to its proper position. The shift to the modern sense, diminish in size or amount, which really took hold in the late 18th century, seems to have happened through intermediate steps.
Like what?
Like first meaning bring to a different state, then maybe bring to a simpler or lower state, and finally landing on make smaller or lessen. It's a gradual narrowing, a reinterpretation of bringing back into bringing down or making more concise.
Interesting trajectory.
Yeah.
And redundant also went on quite a journey, didn't it? From just meaning abundant or too much to no longer needed, and even, quite starkly, unemployed.
Yes, that's a powerful evolution reflecting real social changes. In its early sense, late 16th century, redundant meant abundant, from Latin redundare to surge up or overflow, just lots of it.
Yeah.
By the mid-16th century, it developed the sense of having some superfluous element, basically, more than necessary, repetitive, like redundant phrases in writing.
Got it.
And then significantly in the 1920s, with industrialization and changes in employment, it got extended to refer to someone who is unemployed because their job or skills are no longer needed, made redundant.
That's a big shift from simply too much to no longer needed or useful, often in a, quote, painful human context.
It really highlights how language reflects and adapts to societal shifts.
Another direct reversal, and this one's quite dramatic, is reprieve. You said it went from imprisonment to freedom. That's a complete 180.
It is a fantastic example of a total reversal of outcome. Really surprising. The original meaning of reprieve back in the late 15th century was actually to send back to prison.
No way.
Yes, it came from Latin, re back, and prehender to seize, so literally seize back for prison.
So how did it flip?
The sense development seems to have gone from sending back to prison to maybe postponing a legal process or punishment, and eventually, somehow, arrived at its current meaning, to rescue from impending punishment or danger.
Wow. From putting someone back in jail to saving them from it. A true linguistic escape act.
I couldn't have put it better myself.
And restive, this one always gets me. It originally meant inclined to remain still, but now it means fidgety or restless. That feels so counterintuitive.
It does, doesn't it? And the source explains the fascinating bridge for this reversal. In the late 16th century, restive came from Latin restare, to remain or to stay. So its original sense was indeed inclined to remain still, inert.
So the opposite of restless.
Exactly. However, it became strongly associated with the refractory movements of a horse. Yeah, think of a horse that resists moving forward. Sometimes by stubbornly standing still, but also by kicking, bucking, getting agitated. That association with a horse's stubborn, agitated immobility, or its resistance to control, seems to have led to the modern sense of being fidgety, unruly, or restless.
Ah, so the agitation associated with resisting movement bled into the meaning.
That seems to be the idea. A prime example of a word's meaning being reshaped by a specific, vivid context, in this case, horses.
Fascinating. Okay, what about retaliate? I always think of it negatively, like getting revenge. But you mentioned it wasn't always that way.
That's a key insight into how meanings can narrow over time. In its early meaning, early 17th century, retaliate meant simply to return in kind, and this explicitly included repaying kindness as well as ill treatment.
Really? You could retaliate with kindness.
According to the etymology, yes. The Latin root retaliare meant return in kind from talus such, so you return such as you received. If someone was kind, you could retaliate with a good deed.
But we just don't use it that way now.
Almost never. Today, common usage has narrowed significantly. It's almost exclusively associated with negative reciprocation, responding to harm. It shows how language can sometimes lose its broader scope and become more specialized.
And finally, in this section, revolt. From a political act rising up against a king to a visceral, emotional reaction like being disgusted. How does that happen?
Revolt in its early use, mid-16th century, was definitely about politics. Casting off allegiance, rebelling against authority. It comes via French and Italian, from Latin revolver, roll back.
Yeah, rolling back allegiance.
Right. Then, in the mid-18th century, the meaning broadened dramatically to affect with disgust. So, a word describing rebellion came to signify a strong, visceral, emotional reaction. Feeling revolted.
That's the connection.
Perhaps the idea of turning away or rolling back from something offensive, extending that physical or political turning away to an emotional or sensory one, turning away in disgust.
That makes sense. So what does all this mean? We've seen words flip, split, intensify, negate. Beyond just the amazing shifts, some words carry this incredible weight of cultural history, or reveal origins we'd just never guess.
Exactly. It's like words are cultural artifacts. They preserve these echoes of past societies, technologies, even humor sometimes. They're living archives, holding so much more than just their dictionary definition.
That's a perfect way to put it. You can peel back the layers and uncover whole chapters of human history.
It's not just about language, it's about understanding the world through its words.
Let's dive into radio. Feels like such a modern word, like it just appeared with the technology. But it had a surprisingly quick journey into our lives.
It is relatively modern, yeah. Coined early 20th century, an abbreviation of radiotelephony, drawing from Latin radius for ray, referring to the electromagnetic waves.
Makes sense.
And it was adopted incredibly quickly. Used to name specific radio stations from the 1920s, like Radio Holland. And famously, the BBC's 4 national networks, Radio 1, 2, 3, and 4, inaugurated on September 30th, 1967.
Wow, I didn't know that specific date.
And think about its role in defense, too. Radar from the 1940s. It shows how fast a scientific concept became part of daily life, entertainment, and even warfare.
Absolutely. And thinking about impact, as in railway, that completely revolutionized travel, didn't it?
Yeah.
Trains feel like they've been around forever, but how recent is that revolution, really?
It's much more recent than many people think. The word railway itself is late 18th century, used alongside railroad, but the tech started humbly.
Oh, so?
Earliest versions were just wooden rails, mainly in Newcastle, early 17th century,
Yeah.
used for heavy goods wagons, mostly hauling coal from mines to rivers.
Wooden rails?
Yeah. Cast iron rails came mid-18th century, more durable than wrought iron around 1820. But the real revolution, mass passenger travel, that really kicked off with the Stockton and Darlington line in 1825.
Okay.
And then famously, the Liverpool and Manchester Railway in 1830. So widespread passenger rail, it's really only about 2 centuries old. Its impact was just profound and incredibly fast.
Changed everything. Trade, cities, how people lived. And red, just a simple color, but wow, it's packed with meaning. Politics, bureaucracy, celebration. How does one shade get so loaded?
It's truly remarkable, isn't it? Take the political meaning, red for communist, mid-19th century, inspired directly by party badges and flags, simple visual association.
Right.
Then you have things like red book, often referring to official books with red bindings, linking the color to government authority. Think the Red Book of the British Civil Service or Mao's Little Red Book. Red cent, early 19th century, from the copper color of the coin. Not a red cent means worthless.
Heard that one.
Red letter day, early 18th century, comes from highlighting church festivals or saints' days in red ink on calendars, a special marked day.
Oh, okay.
And red tape. also early 18th century, refers to the actual red or pink tape used to bind official documents. Became a symbol for bureaucracy, excessive formalities.
So from literal color to deep symbolic meaning across politics, value, celebration, bureaucracy. Incredible.
It really is.
Speaking of symbols, rebel.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond its general meaning, it has that very specific cultural resonance, doesn't it? Tied to a certain film star.
Absolutely. While rebel means resisting authority, the phrase rebel without a cause became iconic from the 1955 James Dean film.
Right.
And it specifically defined a certain kind of young person, frustrated, maybe aggressive, but not really tied to a specific political cause, more of an attitude. It shows how pop culture, even a single film, can just cement or redefine a word's popular understanding. Adds a whole new layer.
It really does. Now, record another one with a surprisingly diverse history, linking ancient legal stuff to modern music. How does it connect remembering things in your heart to legal evidence, sound recordings, and even musical instruments?
Record has a truly fascinating path. Middle English, earliest use was legal. Written evidence, a formal register, but it comes from Latin recordare, to remember,
Okay.
which itself is based on cor, chord, Latin for heart. So
Yeah.
literally to record was to commit something to memory, to bring it back to your heart.
Wow. Remember in your heart.
Beautiful, isn't it? Then, late 19th century, the word gets applied to recorded sound phonograph cylinders, then discs, a new way to remember sound.
Makes sense.
The phrase off the record, U.S. journalism, 1930s. And get this, the related word recorder. In late Middle English, it could mean a type of judge, someone who brings to remembrance legally.
Okay.
But that was partly influenced by the verb record, meaning play a tune, which then influenced the name recorder for the musical instrument.
So the judge and the flute are linked through remembering and playing tunes.
It seems so. An incredible journey from internal memory to law, technology, and music.
Amazing. And regatta sounds so elegant, Italian, picturesque, Venice, that it literally means a fight. Suddenly those gondola races seem much more intense.
They probably were. Regatta came into English early 17th century from a Venetian dialect word meaning literally a fight, a contest.
A fight.
Yes. Specifically used for boat races on Venice's Grand Canal. Fierce, competitive spectacles, no doubt. The first English regatta was held on the Thames in 1775, bringing that competitive spirit over. So yeah, think fight on the water.
Changes the image slightly. Finally, for historical context, riot. We still use the phrase read the riot act, usually meaning give a stern warning. But it comes from a very specific, strict old law, doesn't it?
It does. Riot itself, in Middle English, originally meant dissolute living, profligacy, came from Old French riot, debate, or quarrel. But the idiom read the riot act is a direct extension from the British Riot Act of 1715. This law required any assembly of more than 12 people causing a disturbance to disperse when a specific part of the act was read out by an authority.
And if they didn't?
They'd be guilty of a felony. Serious stuff. That act was actually repealed in 1973.
Really? That recently?
Yep. But even though the law is gone, the phrase lives on, meaning issue a stern warning. Comply now or face serious consequences. An echo of an old law in everyday speech.
Okay, now for some genuinely surprising roots, where the word's beginnings are completely different from what you might guess, let's start with rabies. You said it literally meant to rave. That makes the disease itself seem even more terrifyingly apt.
It does, doesn't it? Rabies came into English late 16th century, directly from Latin rabere, to rave or to be mad.
Just madness.
Pretty much. And this same Latin root, vir rapidus, gives us rabid. Early 17th century, rabid initially meant furious, madly violent in a general sense. The source quotes Dickens' Dombey and Son. He was made so rabid by the gout, just extremely angry.
Not necessarily diseased.
Exactly. It was only in the early 19th century that the specific medical sense affected with rabies arose. So a general sense of madness became strongly tied to this specific, terrifying disease that manifests that way.
Chilling. Now, this next group is truly surprising because they seem utterly unrelated. Radius, radiant, radical, and radish. But they all share a common conceptual root. That's mind-boggling.
They do. And it's a brilliant illustration of how a core underlying concept can branch out. Radius, radiant, and radical all derive somehow from Latin radius, meaning ray or spoke, or radix, meaning root.
So, gray or root.
Right. Radius itself, late 16th century, first used in anatomy for the forearm bone, a literal spoke from the elbow. Then in maths, mid-17th century, for the line from a circle center, like a ray.
Got it.
Radiant, late Middle English, originally emitting rays. Extended to a person's joyful appearance, early 17th century, literally radiating happiness or light.
Makes sense. Radish.
Radish, Old English, straight from Latin radix, root, because it's a root vegetable.
Simple enough. And radical.
Radical, late Middle English, first meant forming the root, inherent. Then fundamental. Then, early 19th century, it took on its political meaning of extreme or root and branch change, going right to the root of the issue.
So array, a bone, a vegetable, a political stance, all linked by root or ray. Incredible.
It shows those deep connections.
And raspberry. It has that wonderfully unexpected, slightly rude origin for the derisive sound. This one always makes me chuckle.
It's a great story. The fruit, raspberry, early 17th century, comes from dialect rasp, short for obsolete raspis. The origin of the fruit name itself is actually unknown, surprisingly.
Huh.
But the use of raspberry for that derisive sound, blowing a raspberry, a Bronx cheer, that dates from the late 19th century.
And the connection is?
The source reveals it's a shortening of raspberry tart, which is Cockney rhyming slang for fart.
No, really.
Yep. So yes, quite a playful and definitely slightly rude origin for that sound of derision, a delightful secret hidden in plain sight.
That's brilliant. Okay, rehearsal also has a very visual, almost agricultural metaphor at its root. That image of harrowing the ground.
It's a very vivid image. Rehearsal in Middle English meant to repeat aloud. Its possible origin is from Old French rehersier. That might combine again and herser to harrow from hers. A harrow?
A farm tool.
Exactly. A harrow breaks up and smooths soil by repeatedly dragging spikes over it. So the word carries this metaphor of repeatedly going over the same ground like a harrow to prepare or perfect something.
Does that tell us something about how they viewed practice back then? Like laborious foundational work?
I think it does suggest that practice rehearsal was seen as this repetitive, methodical, maybe laborious process of preparing the ground, refining through repetition until it's ready. It's a very apt image for what rehearsal involves, isn't it?
It really is. And the word remorse, such a strong emotional word. And its etymology just perfectly captures that feeling. That image of regret literally gnawing at you is powerful.
It truly is. Remorse. Late Middle English, from Latin remorder, to vex or torment. But break down the Latin. Re as an intensifier, and mortar to bite.
Bite back intensely.
Exactly. It profoundly describes that visceral, gnawing feeling of regret, guilt, self-reproach, something actively biting at you from within. A persistent internal torment. Ancient roots perfectly encapsulating complex human emotion.
Wow. Finally, rival. Today, we use it for any competitor, sports, business, whatever. But its original setting was much more specific and actually quite poetic. Two people sharing a stream.
It paints quite a picture, doesn't it? Rival, late 16th century, from Latin rivalus. Its original sense wasn't just any competitor. It literally meant a person living on the opposite bank and using the same stream as another. From ravis, stream.
So your rival was the person across the river using the same water.
Exactly. Think about it. Two people or groups relying on the exact same vital resource water for drinking, irrigation, transport, but from different sides. It inherently creates competition, shared interest, potential conflict.
Right there is the source of life, basically.
Precisely. It's an aha moment, connecting the origin of competition to shared resources and physical proximity in a very tangible way. That eventually broadened out into the fierce competition we understand today.
It's truly incredible how many layers of meaning, history, and sometimes sheer surprise are packed into the words we use every single day. This deep dive into the R's really just shows us that language is this living, breathing, evolving thing.
Constantly changing, splitting, reversing, carrying these deep cultural imprints.
It makes you realize how many linguistic layers we just sort of walk over every day without thinking.
Indeed. And what's fascinating here is that even the most common words, the ones we barely think about, have these hidden narratives. Understanding them doesn't just make us, better informed.
No, it's more than that.
It enriches our entire experience of language. It transforms everyday communication into this constant discovery, almost like a puzzle waiting to be solved.
So as you go about your day, maybe listening to conversations or reading, just consider how many other words might be carrying centuries of hidden meaning or surprising reversals or echoes of past lives. How does knowing this history change the way you hear or use words going forward? What other words do you use every day without ever thinking about their roots? words that might have a fascinating story just waiting to be uncovered.
We really encourage you to start looking for those hidden stories. You might be very surprised by what you find.